Om Mano Nabuddhi Nashariram Indriyam Tanmatram Bhutani Nabhutapanchakam Aham Kritas Chapi Tam Sarupakam Tam Isham Atmanam Upuiti Shashvatam Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. Those who seek the highest truth dissolve the mind and the intellect and the elements and the subtle elements and the gross and subtle senses, along with the ego, into the highest principle, Isham, Atman. Then they dissolve that Atman into Brahman. For Brahman is the soul of all. And there shines Brahman. May that Brahman protect us. May that Brahman sustain us. And may that Brahman illumine our thinking consciousness. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, or with the teachings. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, and may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat. So, Swagatam, we welcome you to SRV Loka, live streaming Loka, our Sunday afternoon class. It must be, I believe, 9th class in the series now, and 10th will be next Sunday. Then we'll break for a Sunday for a seminar. So full schedule on the weekends, along with our satsangs, things that we offer to the people, so that maybe they can become so radical as to follow what Shankara teaches, which I just chanted, to dissolve mind and intellect, senses, both gross and subtle senses, or your dream senses, as it were, and the gross elements and the subtle elements, tanmatras are called, where the elements actually come from. Not many people know about that in this day and age. Prana and tanmatras have gone missing in our ideology, Vivekananda said, if they were ever there in the first place. But the East keeps track of them, particularly in Mother India. Dissolve all of those things and tam ishamatmanam, into the Isha, into the chosen ideal, what you love the most in form, that avatar form, or that great illumined soul, Rishi, Guru, Acharya, and Atmanam, all of that into the Atman, which pervades everything, along with the ego. Aham kritas chapi, he says. So aham is that sense of I am. So all of those, dissolve those into the soul of all, which is Brahman. Beautiful how they will put this emphasis on the all-pervasive truth that is so difficult to even hear, what to understand. And then talk about all the tattvas that he mentions there, all these elements of our being in relativity, ego mind, thinking mind, dual mind, and the senses, subtle senses. They want us to know what it is that's tripping us up. When you come to someone like the Avadhut, then he does mention them, along with some other problems that the senses have. So you have the senses, then they're of course going to be outward going, and they're going to be encountering the objects. They're going to be encountering possession of the objects, attachment to the objects, decay of the objects, all the things that are generally known about objects, but people just go ahead and put up with that and covet them anyway. Objects could be bodies, for instance, and gold coins. Even take it away to a Bitcoin in some bank somewhere, it's still going to occupy your mind. Like a reflection in the mirror. If you put the chest there, it reflects in the mirror. So the mind is like that. So that's why very good reason to dissolve it. The dissolution of the mind stream, that's called in both Vedanta and Buddhism. And it's not something that maybe a newbie or somebody just hearing about it would say, well, I have to give up things. It's more like, it's not like, as we're going to be talking about, the Avadhut's mention of renunciation, it's not like the sannyasin or the monk or even the householder that likes to divest of things instead of accumulate them, because accumulation causes that unhealthy, unclean feeling in the mind. Oh, I've got so many things, and I have to clean them, or I have to take care of them, or I let them go too long. And so most sensible people say, well, the less I have, the better. But other people are accumulating, and so their mind's going to be fixated on those things, and that will become habitual. So this wonderful feeling of divesting yourself of things is there in that principle of renunciation. I'm bringing it up because he says, and we'll sing it first, of course, but he says, so, give these up, renounce these things, and you'll be much better off for it. So a sannyasin or a monk is not somebody who's in poverty. Sometimes they make that mistake, as Bhartrihari will show us when we get to his teachings. Not somebody who's in poverty, even willing poverty. He gave it up on purpose, so it's not a lack of things that the sannyasin seeks after or hurts from, misses, but it's this riches he got by doing it. It's called spiritual qualities inside of yourself. Dharma mega samadhi. So they're rich when they give up everything that takes their mind away from true wealth. And so Avadhut is coming from that position. And last week we had 3 verses, the last of which talked about that. He's speaking about it when he says, Dirgo lahu punar itiha nahe vibhago, vistaro shankatam itiha name vibhaha. Konam hi vartulam ihiha name vibhakam. And then he ends, Gyanamritam samarasam. Gagano, sky, pamo, hum, high. I am like the sky, like that. And so this 22nd verse, which we chanted last week, took us toward that direction of giving up things. These things all are occupying your mind space, which is better used for contemplating on even emptiness. What to speak of the fullness of divine reality, then give those up. And so, as I was saying, it's not like some sort of directive to become a monk or a wandering sannyasin or not own anything, because we'll find out now that the householder also has to renounce. So it's a law for everyone, according to Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. If you want freedom, if you want peace of mind, if you want contentment and all those things, and whether you're, say, householder or monk, or what's in between, call it a yogi, either one of those walks of life are going to, it's going to be necessary for them to let go of things that take the mind's attention away from divine reality. And so the householder, like a humpback, Krishna said, humpback goes through the city and runs into a wedding processional, and he's standing around with everyone else watching the beauty of the wedding processional go by, elephants and jugglers and clowns and everything. So So the only difference between him and that person who's watching, all those people around him that are watching, is he's got this weight on his back. And so his mind is always going to be there. So that's how Sri Ramakrishna describes the predicament of a householder. So they always have to think about job and children and making money and work and so forth. And the others are not so. Certainly the yogi in the mountain cave or the sannyasin or monk at the monastery are not going to have their mind on those things. So they have much more time to spend accumulating these riches, because they've given away all these accumulations that are problems with the mind. So perhaps with that introduction into the main subject, because another one of these verses that he sings has to do with the sun of wisdom and how that attracts, shining like the sun, indivisible like the sky, and transcendent like the ether. He's using all these metaphors to help us understand how he feels. So then he's singing this verse that I just chanted. We'll take 3 again this week. Mata pitari tanayari nameka dachit jatamritam nachamano natameka dachit nivyakulam stiramidam paramartha tatvam Jnanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham Shuddham vishuddham avicharamanantam rupam Nirlepam lepam avicharamananta rupam Nishkanda kandam avicharam ananta rupam Jnanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham Brahmadayaha suraganaha katam matra shantim Svargadayo vashataya katam matra shantim Yadiyaika rupam mamalam paramartam tatvam Jnanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham Jnanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham. So his 3 verses this week, I'll read you the English so we get a good idea of where he's guiding us. Free now and forever, I have neither fathers, mothers, children, birth, death, desire. They've all been extinguished. The ever-abiding state of utter calm has come over me, unshakable and supremely tranquil. Thus I have decided, I am pure existence, knowledge, and bliss, boundless as the sky, infinite like space. Knowing the Supreme Brahman, one dares not place it in the context of divided or undivided, or pure or polluted, or having form or being formless. effulgent like the sun. It is infinite and beyond even the intellect. Therefore, I am pure existence, wisdom, and bliss, as boundless as the sky, infinite like space. In the Supreme Brahman, all the gods have merged. Therefore, all the many worlds and lokas that the gods preside over also melt away, soluble into that. The three worlds are thus seen as a dreamlike projection, which leaves me with the conclusion that I am pure existence, knowledge, and bliss, as boundless as the sky, infinite like space. So going back one verse to last week so we can catch up, he says, in the self, the Atman, which is all pervasive, imaginings such as divisions, dimensions, all disappear. Width, length, depth, height, all are so many angular projections of the creative mind. So forget them, renounce them, and know that you are pure existence, knowledge and bliss, as boundless as the sky, infinite like space. So he leads us towards this mental peace and calm, tranquility, this intellectual acumen of knowing the truth, and this transcendent condition of oneness with our true self, Atman. With those three, as he says in other verses, what could be more satisfying and peaceful than this? And so this gets onto that theme of mature renunciation. Again, it has to be seen as not giving up things, but investing everything with Brahman. Because we've taken it separate for so long, it's kind of a rank dualism or a fundamentalism that beings come into the world and either they don't see a second thing other than the world, God and Mammon, Brahman and Maya. They don't see that unseen thing. Number one problem. Number two, if they see it, then they divide it. They keep it separate from themselves. So this act of unification, according to great souls like the Avadhut, is quickly affected and attained by dissolution. It's, again, one of the more radical stances to take, but when one takes it, and one can do it as a householder, as we're going to find out, when one does it, then this life becomes full of Brahman, even amidst objects. Like the yogi, that middle ground I was talking about, can move amongst objects and still enjoyment. In fact, Vivekananda says, can have exquisite enjoyment of them and walk away with no poison, with no karma, with no effects, with no repercussions, and not have to look back in fear of something coming after him from the world, or from society, or from a fundamentalist religious viewpoint, or from an inferior philosophy. Because he's got this Advaita Vedanta fully in hand. And so it shores him up and supports him 100% at all times. So he's speaking like this. Fathers, mothers, children, the idea that people have that they're going to be born, they're going to die, even reborn, if they even get that far to think that deeply. And all of these have been extinguished. So he's dissolving them back into the source. So mano na buddhi shiram tanmatram indriyam bhutani na bhuta panchakam. Bhutani is things, and bhuta panchakam is the five elements. So those things all get extinguished, dissolved back into Brahman. Take these all back to the source, Shankara says, and then turn around and look back at them once they've been dissolved. you'll see that they've become divested of pain-bearing problems. Tansi talks about pain-bearing kleshas, he calls them. The 6 fetters, 8 fetters and the 6 passions. The kleshas are pain-bearing problems. So you want kilesha, you want to get rid of the kileshas, as they call them in Buddhism, and turn those ordinary vrittis into non-vibrational structures. So you're just like being able to look at something like, say, sticking your hand in a mouse trap, see, but having no pain when it snaps on you. I saw that yesterday. You see, somebody took a belt and bent it in half and whipped it, snaps, snap when he pulled the 2 ends. And he's telling the other person, put your finger in there. Because when the 2 parts come together, the sound of the snap happens at the end of the contact, not at the beginning. You didn't know this? No, I didn't know this. So he says, the same with putting your finger in. So he put his finger in, the guy snapped it real hard, and he didn't even feel it. So that would be like taking pain out of a pain-bearing klesha. And then people could live amongst them and, still eat without indigestion, still see without ignorance. And you could take it to all the tattvas. He's trying to say, if you dissolve all these back to the truth, and the truth gets into them, and you see the truth in them. But if you don't dissolve them back, they stay out there in the ignorance of prakriti. Something created, something destroyed, something your father and mother don't know about and didn't tell you. So you're doing this involution process, if you want to put it in Samkhya terms, but you're doing a dissolution process if you want to put it in Advaita Vedanta terms. So this all beckons. In fact, Nag Mahashaya here is this great householder of the Ramakrishna order. It's like famous amongst these 5 or more million people that think about swamis and monks and so forth, but then they think about householders and say, well, there's a couple of those householders that really showed us when they were living how to renounce everything completely and still live there in the body, in the world, and not settle for anything second best in terms of realization or samadhi or enlightenment. So maybe it's a good way of starting this. So remember, right now we're speaking about these angularities of Maya, these divisions, these various dimensions that you create, put something in. I think I'll put that there and that there. It's the ego's device to separate things and put them into different categories or divisions, and then count them. See, and then store them. So Sri Ramakrishna, for instance, never store up for the future. If he stored up for the future anything, he would get disoriented just by the thought that something was waiting for him somewhere that he had put aside. Like Holy Mother gave him a little bag of spices. Here, take some for later. And he walked out of the room and almost walked into the river because his mind, usually thinking about Brahman, had this little kink in it. Well, I've got some spices somewhere for me later, to enjoy. So Avadhut, beings like that, hands off of that kind of tendency, slap the hand of the mind from reaching out to those kinds of things and just take them as they come. Shankara has beautiful verses like that. Just be satisfied with what comes to you from your everyday actions. That's all. You don't have to think I'm getting more or I might lose it. Loss and gain both suck, as one person once told me. So just give that up. That's one of the things you would give up. That's one of these angularities. I'm just bringing this up for you. But if we look at it in terms of what somebody like Swami Vivekananda, who is a full-blown, fully maturely renounced sannyasin, and someone like Nag Mahashaya of the Ramakrishna order, both beings, of course, in the body and have now passed, then it applies to both of them. Their master, Sri Ramakrishna told them, both monks and householders have to renounce the world. So it's just how you renounce it is the distinction, the only distinction between the two. The monk's going to renounce it out there and inside, both, and the householder's going to renounce it in here, but not out there. As Sri Ramakrishna said, the mother bird has to store up to feed her chicks. So that's the householder, has to work, have some sort of practical advantage over the potential of this horrible poverty that could come upon you. We want to draw a distinction between mature renunciation and poverty. It's not hard to do. So they give these up willingly, and then everything comes to them. Like a monk would get everything at the monastery, for instance. No, you don't have to worry about that. You can go out and beg your food for a while, come back. If you don't succeed, we'll feed you. So beings have this idea in their mind then that causes fear. But the attainment of Brahman dissolves fear and doubt for all times, as one of the great Upanishads says. So Sri Ramakrishna explains this best of all. He says, renunciation of the world pertains to every spiritual aspirant, both monk and householder. But listen, there is a difference between the two. A monk does not need to provide for the future, while the mother has to feed her chicks, mother bird that is, has to feed her chicks in the nest. Thus, the teaching is that monks must renounce both inwardly and outwardly, whereas householders must learn to renounce inwardly only. So if you know, as these beautiful set of bullet points here are going to tell us, if you know these facts, then there's really no reason for you to cling to the world anymore. It doesn't matter if you're a monk, householder, yogi, wanderer, even a merchant and professionals, intellectuals. You just look at it on the outward, knowing that it came from the inward, and that inwardly you've renounced it as being real. Very nicely put in one of these quotes we'll get to. But so these are pat principles that you could say about this particular verse he's singing. It's number 21 of this Chalisa we're looking at. First one is, the world is a projection of the mind's unstable, desire-based thinking. So this is the number one problem you'll find also in Bhartrihari's list, in his 100 verses of Shatakan. The very first thing there you see is condemnation of desire, vasanas. So we could be showing these side by side, but we don't want to spread ourselves too thin. Keeping focused on these bullet points. The second one is probably even more obvious to people. Objects have no abiding substance and cannot fulfill the soul. Number 3, name and form cover divine reality. So right away you hear the first 3 and you're beginning to say, I think I have to renounce. See? Or where am I attached? Might be the second question. If this is the truth the seers are telling me and they're having bliss and I'm not, then these 3 things ought to be taken, are taking me into deeper water. It's like quicksand. Your ego has gotten into quicksand. So it hears everything out there is projected by your own mind. That starts to sink about a foot into the quicksand, you see, towards its death, the ego, that is, the individual self. Then it hears, objects have no abiding substance, my dear. They can't fulfill you. Another foot sinking into the quicksand, you see. Third thing, name and form cover divine reality. Well, if you think about that one, then everywhere around you in nature is name and form. And so it's not letting you see your true nature. It's not letting you perceive Brahman or commune with Brahman. And you can go on praying and hoping and even meditating to try and have vision of Brahman. But when does it happen to you? When does it happen to anyone? It's only to very, very rare souls that they get any kind of darshan with that highest reality. can be visions of gods and goddesses, or dreams of ancestors, or maybe a seer or a guru comes back and sends you a message through the dream network. But these higher visions are very rare. And so you're adding more modifications on top of that by not knowing that name and form itself, which is the definition of Maya, name, form, time, space, and karma, those are in the way of you seeing your true nature. So there you are walking among them blind. Oh mind, you walk around with eyes wide open, but you remain purely blind, completely blind, one song of India says, one line. You walk around with eyes open, but you remain completely blind. So this is an inner seeing that has to happen. You would probably open those inner eyes if you dissolved them. You see, I have to dissolve them back into Brahman, so where are they? So you go looking for them. And you trade those two in for this one at some point in that involution process. And you begin seeing, truly seeing, the truth of everything. You'd see it how it truly is, not how it appears to be, which is one of the boasts of the yogis. They see things as they truly are all the time. And they don't get caught off guard or taken by surprise by appearances of things. We were talking about it at satsang yesterday morning, how caught off guard by appearances, then people suffer that problem. So the fourth one, as the ego sinks deeper in the quicksand of the truth, pleasures are always accompanied by pain. All right, that's it. I give it up. See, if that's true, that I can't even have pleasure uninhibited, then free of charge, then what am I doing here? See, so leading you both towards this equanimity and peace of mind that you've been seeking all the time, but you've been seeking in the midst of these first four things, right? And this is one of the strange things about the human race and just today's day and age is they set themselves up to pray to God, they set themselves up to meditate upon God, they set themselves up to go to church or to take a path or select a guru or get a mantra, and then they start these practices without putting the mind in a condition that's requisite to gaining what they're after. So you're working against the grain all the time, trying to get some freedom, but you're saying, well, I can keep my bondages at the same time too, can't I? No, you can't. Freedom is that one thing in which you'll have to let go of everything else to get. Which is why we can't really accept political freedom as real freedom. It's always going on in the world on Earth. What else here? The Earth plane is the hub from which rebirth in ignorance takes place. So now they bring forth rebirth, but the Avadhut says, I don't have mothers, fathers, or children anymore, and I don't have birth, death, or decay anymore. I'm pure wisdom, knowledge, and bliss, absolute, indivisible like the sky. So big contrast there. And so this is a list of pat principles which will convince you to renounce things. And you don't have to be a monk to do it. In fact, but if you're a householder, then if you're not doing it, that's risky. That risks things like rebirth. It risks things like having to go to school again and again, having to get a job again and again, having to have children again and again, having to have your children die again and again, having yourself die again and again. These are all risks that you'd be better off not having by keeping this one non-dual stance of total renunciation of everything. And you can do it as a householder, as Nag Mahashaya will tell us in a minute here. Time seems real, space actual to earthbound souls. So then, philosophically speaking, you're going to have to develop some depth, that acumen of the intellect again, which looks at time, kalas, phases of time, that looks at space, desha, and looks at how everything happens in the two. But that's where, Maya has to project those first. Because Maya in the chain of spandas, or evolutes, vibrating spheres, comes before time and space. Time and space get created out of Maya. So, it's a projection of the mind in Maya. These are greater minds that are doing this projection, greater than ours. Gods, goddesses, asuras, Trinity beyond them. So where is the origin of time and space, and where's the first cause? So you seek the origin of things. Nature hypnotizes the soul into forgetting its true nature. So that's the outer glitter, and you forget the inner light due to the outer glitter. We'll talk about that in his next verse when we look at the sun god, how some souls, like Samkriti, for instance, I'm going to repair inside to the sun god and ask him the truth about light, so I can hold it forever. It can be mine. That light of consciousness can be mine forever. I won't have any doubts about it. So I'll go to the source of that light. And then I'll dehypnotize myself. After Prakriti hypnotizes the soul, then Maya produces varieties, and that obscures the truth of non-duality. We were talking yesterday at satsang about peeling the mango, and how both knowledge and ignorance are in the skin of the mango. And then non-duality would be that fruit, flesh of the mango. So you would peel both knowledge and ignorance off the mango of non-duality. He's singing non-duality in every verse. The result of the reason he can say these things is because he has the non-dual possession. Non-duality as his possession, you see. Otherwise, he would have nothing no place to lay his hat, no place to sit, like birds and foxes. The Son of Man has no place there. But when you have non-duality, then that's where you're firm in your station. And you take up that station and remain undisturbed, unperturbed, and equanimous. Somebody wrote me today about upeksha, nice word in Sanskrit. It's equanimity. And they say, I like that word a lot, equanimity. Fulfillment never arrives, satiation never comes, if the world is taken to be real. So that's what I mentioned earlier. But if you know the world to be unreal, you've renounced inside, then Dharma can satiate your desires. A better way of saying it would be fulfill them. And you could come back like the Avadhut, not having desires for anything. And then what comes and goes is just a matter of, back to number one, isn't it? Things rise out of the mind, and then they fall back into the mind. But if I don't desire the things that I see coming up and down, like seeing a Ferris wheel at a circus, I want to get on that, So if the mind is a circus and the Ferris wheel is the things that are coming up out of the circus that you desire, cotton candy and various rides and everything, you walk into the circus of the Avadhut and just look at the spectacle and you don't partake of anything, by way of metaphor, analogy, circus of this world. And I'm saying this because my own guru was taken, Swami Sheshanandaji Maharaj, peace and blessings be upon him, they took him to Jansen Park in Portland, Oregon early on. It was supposed to have, the largest roller coaster in the world at that time. That's what they were boasting. And so 3 swamis went. The students all, I think the Seattle, Washington Swami Sheshananda, and one of the swamis down in California were all there at the Portland Center. So they took them all to see this Ferris wheel, and the students wanted them to get on the Ferris wheel with them, not the Ferris wheel, the roller coaster, and wanted to get on that. Everyone's, as far as we were concerned, when we were kids, we were scared to get on that thing. And when we were there with our schoolmates, nobody would get on it. because then later you'd say, oh, I got on it, prove it, that you couldn't because you were too scared to get on there. So these swamis, started to get on it and said, Kiran Maharaj, aren't you coming? And he said, no, I haven't, renounced the world just to get on another ride, or something. He said something like that. And then this other swamis took off their coats, long overcoats, said, well, here, you hold our coats, and draped them over Swami's arms. Got on there on the roller coaster and took the ride and got off, and that was it. So, of course, with souls like that, do it or not doesn't really matter. Do it for the sake of the students, or just to say that you've done it, and do it with detachment, do it for fearlessness, whatever the reason may be. But Swami Shishananda was adamant about returning to any kind of pleasure or fun from the world. He had renounced it as far as he was concerned. That was it. End of story. So this is why I'm saying, using this as a metaphor, that the Avadhut would look at the circus of the world and just look at it as a projection of the mind. Back to number one is what I'm saying here. So Nag Mahashai, Durga Charan Nag Mahashai is his full name, has a beautiful quote here, rare to find much that he was recorded when he was alive. But he said, the outside world is the projection of your own mind. Okay, so there's number one. It's just like how naturally they accept this in India, and how we have to hear it and go, what? It just came out of evolution and nature over thousands of years. I mean, we're just set in that kind of idea. But just to accept right away that, if you looked at it ultimately from both a philosophical and a spiritual place, oh, it's from the mind. So then, mano, nabudi, shariram, indriyam, bhutani, bhuta-panchakam. Mind is the first thing that Shankara said that you dissolve. So renounce your own mind. Because if you knew that pleasure and pain was coming from it, life and death was coming from it, ownership and losing of things, possession and loss were coming from it, all these things could be traced directly back to it, and you saw that for a fact, that's the first thing you'd want to renounce. So I can't even get one sentence into his quote without saying how naturally they just know this, even the householder, you see. The outside world is a projection of your own mind. As you give out to the world, so you receive back from it. It is just like looking into a mirror. But while looking, do not get attracted by occult powers, which will lead you astray. Renounce all to gain God's grace. Abstinence, especially from lust and greed, draw a man naturally close to God. This was his own experience because it was so close to Sri Ramakrishna and to Holy Mother too. He would have to watch him around Holy Mother because if she gave him a little food on a leaf plate and handed it to her, he was like, the goddess just gave me something to eat. There was just no doubt in the mind that that was the Divine Mother of the Universe in Sri Sharda's body that was feeding him. So he'd eat the whole leaf plate if you didn't watch him, because he was in ecstasy when he was around her. So he's eating nectar, and Holy Mother would say to one of her attendants, make sure he doesn't eat the leaf, because it was given by her, so, it'd be hard to get that away from him. He'd just go on eating the food, the prasad. So he is very, very close to God. And he and his wife both, just immaculate renouncers as householders. Like supreme examples of how a householder can, should, and did do that act of renunciation. And then lived in peace and bliss with God for the rest of their lives. Let's see what Swamiji says. First, he says, in deference to the difficulty of it, it is hard work to keep oneself steady in the midst of this whirl of lust and lucre, and hold on to one's own ideals, and to conceive of the ideas of realization and perfect renunciation. It is indeed difficult work, is it not? Yeah. So a lot of my students who are younger, who have been coming here 30 years into SRV's life in the world of service, they know how difficult it is to keep these ideals high. And basically that's because the mind hasn't been fully renounced yet, because that's where these desires are coming from. There's the obstacles that keep you from having this free concourse or communication. Darshan with Brahman is still not free of the idea of divisions. What he starts off here, angularities, dimensions, divisions, up, down, in, out, all of these things he's talking about. The mind is still holding them, and then still having to have communion with something that has none of them. See, it's what is they call that a square peg into a round hole? That's what people are doing if they haven't purified the mind. But I like the word he uses here, abstinence. That's another good English word for renunciation. If it's too monastic thinking for you, then think about abstinence, or back off one more degree and say detachment. This is Vairagya Shatakam we're going to try and see next. Bhartrihari called it 100 verses on detachment. So there are detachment, abstinence, renunciation, and then there's this mature renunciation that's just natural. So there are degrees of this attainable to people and possible to people like us who are Westerners in the world with busy lives and all of that. Well, if you try this, or if you have been trying this on like an overcoat, you say, for years maybe, you've been at this path of liberation, thinking about it in terms of the highest ideal. I will get there, even amidst all these duties I have. Then there are signs that read about success. So here next to Swamiji's picture, with his eyes looking far away like a bird, mother bird hatching her eggs, as Sri Krishna described him, is a list of these signs. One longs only for realization of Brahman. All right, well then let's be a little honest. Most of us long for the realization of Brahman once in a while. And so that's when you go looking for a mantra, a guru. Pick up a new book and say you're going to study it. Or start a meditation practice, you see. And under the impetus of those very good intentions, you start into it. And then the perseverance becomes necessary. And the intensification. See, you need clarification and intensification. You don't want to intensify an impure mind. And that's a mistake people are making, square peg into a round hole. To do the practice first and then pray to Brahman, or to Isham, to Ishvar, we would say. You can't really pray to Brahman, but you're praying to divine reality to reveal itself to you. And with the Hindus, it's interesting because Holy Mother used to say, they come to me and they ask me for a vision of God, but where's their devotion? It's one of her famous sayings. They all come to me and say, give me a vision of God. Can you give me a vision of Sri Ramakrishna? Because he had passed by then. But she looked at them and said, oh, they want this right away without doing any practice or preparation. And they don't even really have devotion yet. What do they really have a vision of God for? To get something that's in their minds. So they haven't renounced their mind yet, have they? Those are where desires are coming from. So if you renounce the mind, then you would see the light of Brahman and you would ask for something else. Let's see, pure love, pure knowledge, pure devotion, and to not be enchanted by the world bewitching Maya. Those are 4 things Sita asked for when Ram asked her what she wanted from him, because he was God incarnate. I'm just saying, as they say. So longs only for realization of Brahman. If you have that longing, intensify it. If you've done the practices that gave you the longing, then intensify that. Second, one feels content with anything that occurs. There are well, how many did I count? 42 points of the immortal Dharma in the Gita that I made a count in that chapter. And one of them was be content with anything. So that's what Krishna told Arjuna on the battlefield of these points that, that he must have been listening to, and that when I read the Gita, I was definitely listening to, and I made a list of them because I'm not a listless person, as you all know. Then that's one of the things I put down there. Be content with anything. Like my Swami at the circus, looking at roller coaster, right? Why go on it? I don't have any desire for it. I renounced the mind a long time ago, and all the circus rides of the world. So contentment we're talking about, right? Or appear upekshanam, as I said. Also, one harbors no fears, not even of death. So death also and birth, which he's free of here, come from the mind. And so that the ideas of them. I think I'm going to take a body. Outside of the body, you say this. So when people in heaven are coming back to earth, if you want to put it very simply, then they take bodies from the mind. They have a mental complex, and they create the possibility for their transmigrating soul to take on another body on earth because they have desires still. So they will do that. And once they get into the body, they can't see God anymore or heaven. Have you noticed? It's called a belief now. And very, very, very seldom do you have people who have anything more than provisional faith. If they have provisional faith beyond belief, then at least they remember very clearly that they were somewhere at some time in their past, before their birth, connected to this divine reality, this light. But then they pass from the body because also they pass back into the mind, because their mind is still operating in cycles, right? So they pass back into the vibrations of the mind as a heavenly body, because that body is also projected by the mind. Heaven's also projected. He said all worlds are projected by the mind. And then they think, I see the light, and I didn't see it before on earth. See, but heaven is so attracting. I mean, if you think Prakriti, he says, is so attracting here, then don't you think that heaven will also be very attracting there? Because it's just another form of nature, but it's now in an unmanifested form in the paradise realms, you see, in the lokas. So they look at that, forget about the light of God, and see the light of unmanifested Prakriti and the beauty of paradise, and no idea of God occurs to them. So it's here on earth where you have to develop that longing for God. These are very connected. These are very connected. So death through fear is, according to the father of yoga, the worst of all hells. Yeah. Klesha, same thing. Faith, the worst of all hells, is fear of death. It's because it's just unreasonable to think that way. Why? Because you're an eternal soul. But, Prakriti with the mind and Maya has covered that fact. You have to get that fact back, you see. You have to get that back in your possession, that I am, as he's saying here, infinite like the sky, transcendent of all things. If you have to say I'm not the mind and body and senses and tanmatras and five elements and all that, and do the dissolution of the mind to get that fact back in your mind, in your higher mind, then do that. This is called having a higher ideal, non-dual philosophy-wise, and then accepting it and affirming it and possessing it and living in it. Smriti, Shruti, you see, is the first of those. And then Anubhava is the last of those. So In the meantime, your mind has to manana, think about that. Oh, that's so true. I know that's so true. I accept it. I'm through with all this. And that moment of renunciation, everything unreal disappears because it wasn't real to begin with. And now you hold that, right? You hold that. You live in it every day. Living out in every day. Where's the last time you heard that? In 108 verses, right? No, we're talking about 40 verses here. So if you harbor fear, something has to be done about that, fear of death. Immediately, you have to be told and hear and realize that you're an unborn soul. 2 Sundays from now, I'll talk at a place called New Thought Church. What's your subject going to be, Babaji? Ajati, your unborn, undying nature. That's what I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to tell people listening on about this non-origination, which is back to the mind. The mind is throwing up things. So it seems to be originated in the mind, but none of the things that the mind so-called originated are real. They're just projections, as proven by the fact that they dissolved back into the mind once they were projected. They dissolved. So this hypnotism that nature's got me under, is all based in thinking transformation to be real. What's that called? Parinama. Yeah, so ajati and aparinama are these 2 pillars I've been talking about like forever now in this particular lifetime and in this particular context. Those 2 things have to be considered manana with your mind very seriously. Those ring with truth. Those make sense as compared to everything else I've learned up to this point from society, from religion, from upbringing. This makes sense, the most sense to me. It must be true. It's the highest thing I can think of. So much to say then, find what's in your mind that's tripping you up. Renounce it, dissolve it. Don't let it persist anymore. And see what happens. It could be an experiment if you want. Well, Swamiji says, eternal peace and unalloyed bliss are constantly present. You know the Sanskrit for that, right? Vilapya shantim paramam bhajasva. Yeah, we've learned that chant from Sanskara. Eternal peace, bliss, and unalloyed peace are constantly present. Remember, we're talking about signs that your renunciation, based on these points, is successful, is becoming successful. You feel this deeply, even beyond intuition, which is a good start but not a good finish. Realization has to follow. It's just like affirmation has to follow negation, then has to be followed by confirmation. So these things have a life of their own, and that's how you reach mature renunciation from immature renunciation. And here's a good one. Despite knowledge of the emptiness of all things, one continues to work for the highest good. What soul who had reached any high elevated position where non-duality was a part of his realization has not thought about that? Otherwise it's what's the point anymore? This is all unreal. I don't want to be here. I'll just give up the body. There were people who came to Sri Ramakrishna at kind of a young age who told him that. Well, I've heard the Vedanta and I've probably had many lifetimes and I've seen you, what's left, you see. I've seen God in human form, what's left? So I'm out of here. And Sri Ramakrishna didn't say anything, and a couple of days later found out that person had committed suicide. Would be a weird way of saying it. But of course, he told him this is not a sin as they're trying to teach you in Christianity in this day and time in India, when the missionaries were there trying to convert people. That this person was fully realized, had seen all of these truths and accepted them. But there is a higher perspective that one sees success well, we skipped that one, didn't we? I'll go back to it. Despite knowledge of the emptiness of all things, one continues to work for the highest good of others. I didn't have quite enough room to say that, but that should be obvious. The one before that, which I guess I think I skipped over, one sees success and failure as dictates of divine will. And therefore, much like, the mind's throwing up things and coming down, I have nothing to do with it. It's either the work of divine will, the Upanishad says, or it's my own karma. Those are the two things. He'll default to a second position. If it's not the work of the divine will and I'm mistaken about that, then it's my own karma. He won't go anywhere other than those two positions, because both of those will free him. If it's my own karma and I'm mistaken about things, I need to correct that. I need to neutralize my karma in order so I can see the divine will of the Mother, of the Lord of the universe, as Nag Mahashaya saw it in Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother, and in his brother, Swami Vivekananda, his younger brother, as it were. This last one, one shines, one's status is the formless Brahman. Exactly what Avadhut is already saying here to us. One's goal is to reveal Ishvara to others. One's work is to raise all beings to the remembrance of their innate perfection. Three things in one point. So if you want to check the success of your renunciation that you're into, then this is the way you're going to come to a conclusion about it. After all these other points have been put in place, you've considered them, you've contemplated them, you've accepted them, you've confirmed them, then here you are. Work for the highest good of others based on the formless Brahman is your background. That's your support. And to reveal Ishvara to others. And always raise beings to remember, to the level of remembering their divine nature. Liable of liable. It's a sin to call another sinners. All beings are Atman. They're divine by nature, as Swamiji said himself. And he says further here, the condition of the world is pitiable. The people here cannot even dream what renunciation truly means. Renunciation, you must praise this above everything else. There will be no spiritual strength unless one renounces the world. Renunciation, this ideal is to be attained through less and less worldliness, less and less resistance, less and less destructiveness. May God send renunciation and unworldliness into this world. He wrote in one letter that I found. One of his own letters said this. So, beautiful chart here, and we're taking apart this 21st verse. Let's then go quickly on to Bhartrihari's, because we spent a little time on this important crown. They called Sri Ramakrishna's crown, that he wore was of renunciation. That was his highest. He was the highest example for that, and loved God, because of that. So in Bhartrihari's case, he was this great soul that wrote 3 Satakams in his life. One about trying to enjoy the world, one about amorous love, and one about detachment or renunciation. So the seers like him very much when we look back on his life, because in one lifetime he went through these 3 phases: being attached to the world, being attached to relationships, and then getting detached from them both. In one lifetime he sampled those things, renounced them later, and wrote this Vairagya Shatakam. And the most famous verse of it, mainly, because I've done an English translation of it myself, of these 100 verses, but I can't put them all on a chart, of course, but this one you could, because my teacher, Swami Sheshanandaji Maharaj, he used to quote this when he was talking to us. In enjoyment is the fear of disease. In high birth, the fear of losing caste. In wealth, the fear of tyrants. In honor, the fear of losing her. In strength, the fear of enemies. In beauty, the fear of aging. In knowledge is the fear of defeat. In virtue, the fear of scandal. In the body, fear of death. In life, all is fraught with fear. Renunciation alone is fearless. Pretty much covers the gamut, doesn't it? And every verse, just like the Avadhut here, Gyanamritam Samarasam Gagono Pamaham, he puts that back on us every time to convince us. And the same in Bhartrihari's, the end of every one of his verses, renunciation alone is fearless. Renunciation alone is fearless. Renunciation alone is fearless. Okay, anything else about it, it's the only reasonable place to go if you want to be free. Based upon all these points, should we go over them again? One of the more powerful ones is that, that pleasure always leads to pain. Some people probably aren't clear about that. I'm just going to keep having pleasure. They have a painful experience. They don't trace it back to the pleasure they had a few days ago. And this kind of karma that's like a kriyamani karma that's coming up, when they suffer it, they say, oh God, why did you do this to me? Or what a fool I was. But neither of those is really true. It came from your karma. You can't throw a rock up in the air, Swami Vivekananda said, and stand around for 5 seconds and have it fall back down and say, a ghost threw it back at me. That's what superstitious people are saying about religion and God and so forth. Oh, God made me do it, or devil made me do it. You threw the rock up, and it came back down because of gravity. So that's just something you accept, and then, don't throw rocks anymore, or make sure to get out of the way after you throw one. So these great realizations that these beings have had are based on these undeniable facts of non-dual philosophy. That's why they have to be heard. Srimati said to Swamiji, the young Yaran, when you teach people, give them this non-duality first. Then they can hold it, hide it somewhere, and work on their lives after hearing it. But to not get that non-dual truth and to work on our lives, never having heard it, is what position we're in. And then it comes to us as a shock or a surprise, and we have a hard time accepting it, right? So much water has already gone under the bridge. So many rocks have already been thrown, and not all of them come down yet. So you're going to have to dodge some things called your own karma, but you're going to blame it on other things. Again, square peg in a round hole thinking. So beautiful verse there, and I remember Swami Sheshananda would have his own English verse to read out to us, because whatever was on the mind of people, it's like, oh, some starlet died, some movie star or something, so in beauty is the fear of old age. So he would take whatever was going on in the day, take this verse, modify it, and read it out in his own way. And the rich fear thieves instead of the rich fear tyrants. It was what he would say. So anyway, flexibility like that was really beautiful, and you were on hand to hear it, and knew that he didn't get it from riding on a roller coaster. He did it from a whole life of renunciation, back to his teens, when he met Holy Mother. Well, these can go by quickly because we've actually already said them, but when the commentators and other jnanis and other beings seeking liberation heard and read Bhartrihari's 100 verses. It's just like people finding out about Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. A few hundred years later, 20 Hindu philosophers have commented on his Yoga Sutras. It was the same with Bhartrihari. They came to condense it all, and I saw the condensation of commentaries of Bhartrihari's 100 verses, and this is basically what it came down to. Number one, the 10 headings of renunciation: condemnation of desire. It's a very radical way of saying it, but when you found out how much desire was ruining your life of everything from leisure to peace, then you would also hate it. It would become, like I just said, it's like this, I'm accumulating things and I've got this unhealthy feeling in my mind, like I put it all under my house, you see. And I have to move now. It's been like staying under your house for like 10 years. And you've got a bunch of things under there that you don't even remember what they are anymore, mixed with fleas and rats and other things, bugs. You have to go down there and, sift through that. That's that feeling you have, using that as a metaphor with non-renunciation. That you're holding these things in your mind that are not necessary and they're actually impediments. So you make efforts to detach from sense organs. That's called sadhana. You turn the senses back into the inner senses, and if you're talking about dissolution, you use the power of the senses and turn them back in on themselves. Krishna says, like a turtle would withdraw its limbs into its shell if some animal was attacking it. Protect itself. Condemnation of poverty of a supplicant attitude. So here's where this immature renunciation comes forward that he was aware of when he was, some of the verses were about the horrible lives of priests and kings. He really gets on a rag about that because he's been under kings and seen, how they rule and how they eat from the flesh pots and how they have many queens and how they have all these pleasures and everything, and people outside are starving. And then he went to be with these mendicants that were walking along the paths and see what hypocrites they are, and how they were, a lot of their renunciation was just a kind of mockery. So he says they put on poverty and then they go beg at the temples for their food. And then they get in, hobnobbing with the priests, the Brahmin priests and so forth. He's got like verses on this, which he describes his experience with. And so he's calling out a poverty of a supplicant attitude. It's like, what? You didn't take on poverty by renouncing the world and letting the mother take over? You took on poverty just to call yourself poor so that you can get fed by others? That's not monasticism. Certainly not sannyas either. So this is a point he brings up that's very interesting, I think. And then delineation of the evanescence of enjoyments. Pretty much back here to the first chart again. Evanescence is a little kinder word than saying that, they just won't fulfill you outright. Description of the workings of time, principle of change. That was also already read out to it. Kala, time, kalas, periods of time. Like lifetimes, kalas. Like ancestor rebirth, many times over again. That's kalas. Time is going through cycles. Kala Chakra, Buddha called it. And people aren't waking up off of that wheel for Mahayugas. That's a very long time. And until people in this age are just saying, life is all there is, and then I die. It's just this wrong conclusion, and it's just so defeating, and it's not true at all. You're never born, so you never die. What about that? Adati, non-origination. They won't go there and consider it, you see. So that's why you study time and space in the last chart we looked at. So somebody told me just the other day in the email, I really like that teaching of the 4 absorptions, you see. Absorption into Brahman. So I went to your book, Footfalls, and I looked at that teaching on the 4 absorptions. Oh, I love that. So that's what you like to hear, you see. It's when people take it seriously, find a teaching that it comes from, connect to it, study it, and accept it. And that all of a sudden becomes their possession. Just like nutrients from food became a part of your bloodstream and your organs and made you strong. The same with your mind. When you took the nutrients from the scriptures and from these teachings, it became a part of your thinking. And you'll always have it now. It's just like another thing you could just check off your list. A rope thrown to you from the ego sinking in quicksand, or somebody else and comes along, frees you. The sixth part was comparison of a monk to a king. I mentioned that already. Supplicant poverty was what he saw, people renouncing for the wrong reasons. But then when he lived with kings and then renounced the world and saw what kings, how monarchs were being born and dying, he has a whole long set of verses about that. So he compares that in this grand scheme of renunciation he's come to. Then control the mind via gaining wisdom. And that wasn't necessarily meant. It was inferred, but it wasn't really said in the last chart we're looking at. So this is, of course, beautiful. This is dharana, or concentration on something higher. It's probably one of the better ways for the people of this day and age to achieve renunciation. It's just to take your mind off of all that, rather than take the trouble to dissolve it, renounce it, and all this, which you might not have the capacity for, and just take the mind off of it all and put it on wisdom. And concentrate on the mother of wisdom as you do that would be helpful. And then your concentration on thoughts of Brahman alone, to quote the Upanishads. I took my mind and I fixed it on concentration on Brahman alone. So whenever it started to go away from Brahman, call it back. And this is the exact advice that Krishna gives in the Gita. Whenever the senses and mind go away, you call them back, Arjuna. And so that you develop this power of concentration. Then discrimination between the mutable and the immutable. Viveka. Worship of Shiva. Shiva Bhakti. And then 10, freedom characterized by the yogic attitude of an Avadhut. That's beautiful, isn't it? Because here we are singing the Avadhut, but here's Bhartrihari mentioning that he ran into Avadhuts and how their renunciation was so pure and complete, that they were seeking moksha sincerely with that kind of longing that he talks about. You must have longing. When you feel like you have longing for God all the time, then you're that close to that apex. The rest of this chart really is another chart that I didn't bring because I decided we'd concentrate on these two. But the quote at the bottom is a good conclusion. This is the only work, Vivekananda says, to call upon mankind to awake, arise, and stop not till the goal is reached. Utistata, Chikrata, Prapya, Varani, Bodhata, that chant, like a razor's edge. See, it's the spiritual path. So he concludes, it is renunciation, there's the Sanskrit for it, tyaga, that is meant by religion, nothing else. So if the religion is involved in wealth, if the religion is involved in war and violence, if the religion is involved in social conventions or any kind of convention, then you're going to have to say, that religion is coming from the conventional mind. And I renounce the mind, so I don't have to worry about it. And then you're free of religion, or you found true religion. Vivekananda called that irreligion when he came here. He'd seen it in Hinduism in this day and age. He came to the Christian lands and saw it in Christianity too. So he wasn't sparing either one of them when he criticized their religion. And he, at the same time, he was bringing out the best of religion. I've not come to destroy the words of the prophets, but to resurrect them, Jesus said. And so these great souls come and they see the deterioration of religion over an age, and they'll step forward and point out the eternal, the Sanatana parts of them, and bring those up and make a new religion out of the old one using its best points. Come to my seminar 2 Sundays from now, and we'll see how that's done by a great soul like Vivekananda. All right, so we have taken that verse apart pretty well. I must admit that in 40 verses there's so many things in which we could talk about. Now we've already taken up 24 of them, so we're over halfway through it. This will be the longest class series we've ever have done. If next week is number 10, and we've only gotten a little more than halfway through it. So, people, helpers in SRV are already going back and posting these classes. And so we'll have this beautiful study of the Avadhut Stotram here in the Avadhut Gita to look back on and just relive all of this. So I'm just relying on that rather than the fact that there's not enough time to go through every sentence, because every sentence he sings here is beautiful and full of teachings. Like, give it up, forget it, he says. So I've just taken most of the class just commenting on that part of verse 21. But let's look at verse 23 and 22 here, where he says, knowing the Supreme Brahman, one dares not place it in the context of divided or undivided. And remember, if you remember the Sanskrit, Khanda Akhanda is what he was singing. So that's Akhanda is indivisible, Akhanda Satchitananda, and Khanda, so with division. So he doesn't want to describe Brahman like Buddha didn't want to talk about God, and Patanjali and Kapila didn't want to talk about God in their philosophies, yet they were so profound God-based philosophies. So in that way then, so he doesn't want to put it in that context. He just says it's ever abiding, and a state of utter calm has come over me. And then says, it's effulgent like the sun. It is infinite and beyond even the intellect. So we just said, Mano Bujya Hamkara Chittani Naham, or Mano Bujya Tanmatra, how we opened up the chant. So Mano Bujya, intellect, is next. He takes up, because intellect is higher than the mind. Thought intelligence is the first compound off of consciousness, Vivekananda says. So a mind is rather dual. I almost said dull, but that's what I mean. It's dull and it's dual compared to the intellect. When that intellect is honed and refined, then it can act as a goad to pierce through this otherwise diaphanous veil that we've been talking about here, that's in front of our eyes. That if we were to be able to see through it, all of a sudden we could dissolve the mind. We could renounce that. So let's look at what he says here in terms of this chart. It shines like the sun. And so it immediately reminded me of a retreat or a seminar or both that we did a year or two ago, and where I created this chart called All Hail Surya Narayan. So it's the sun god we're talking about here. And we go to Upanishads like the Akshi Upanishad. That Akshi is, means this Akshatam, right? This third eye is what they're referring to. So that's where the sun of knowledge is. So it would be something that you would have to reach after renouncing the outer senses. outer eyes, let's say, and then renouncing the inner eyes. And what would you get? You'd get this single eye. Utkramantan stiti vyapi bhunjanam. Krishna says in the Gita. Nanu pashanti jnana chakshushaha. So he's saying, people don't see with these eyes how the Lord comes and how the Lord goes, how consciousness all of a sudden appears and then disappears in people. And he says, in the living and in the dying, and those being born. So he's talking about not just how all of a sudden you'd get samadhi and you wouldn't be the same anymore. He's talking about Brahman being there in the birth, in the life, in the death, and in the rebirth as consciousness, and how people don't see that. So this is why they say, I'm dying, I'm dying. And Brahman is there in them saying, you never die, you never die. See? And so you have to try to convince the mind about that. So this is why, he says, they see who see with the eye of wisdom, Jnana Chakshu, but the others don't see. So opening this third eye is a Jnana, wisdom, Chakshu, seeing, is very powerful. Back to this chart where we talked about wisdom. Control of the mind being gaining wisdom. If you're waiting for an eye to appear on your forehead, of course, that's like waiting for the chakras in your spine to open up. It's just silly. But when you start knowing these truths and accepting them, your eye is open, your third eye is open, and it'll show you things in dream that it didn't show you when it was closed. It'll show you things in deep sleep and samadhi that it didn't show you when it was closed. And this is what Avadhut is trying to explain about his condition, his conditionless condition. He says, this is the way I see. That's beautiful. Anyway, there rises the thousand-armed, existent in myriad ways, the life of all animate beings. Meditate upon that one who is omniform, all compassionate, omniscient, ambrosial, and is the essence of light, the scorcher. Salutations to the blessed offspring of the infinite, the power of all eyes to see, the flood of endless days, the flood, all hail. I mean, you couldn't hear that and ever even heard to a minute degree about the Upanishads, and someone would ask you, where does that come from? Must be the Upanishads, even if you don't know them. That kind of beauty, inspiration, poetry, you never heard it in any scripture said like that. Talking about the sun god. Let's see if there's another one here. That's one of the real beautiful ones. But we like that. He grants us the flood of endless days. So if we look at our lives and we worship, and we forget to worship the sun, oops. Because, and we're not talking about sun worshipers who like to get a tan or, have to go somewhere where it's good weather all the time. We're talking about what the sun really symbolizes. Again, always, like he says, Jnana Chakshu, that's the sun of wisdom you're talking about. The billions of suns in the night sky came from that. Just like everything rose from the mind, from the intelligent mind, things rise too. So those are great thoughts that turn into great objects later down the run of evolution. But back to the source of involution, you'll find a sun god. There's a good picture of him there. And I'll just quickly read for you from bottom to top all of what's written on those rays that's emanating off him. He's commander of the army of light and the revealer of darkness. That's something you have to think about. He reveals darkness because it's his opposite. See? And in darkness is this beauty. He reveals darkness as a principle, see, of consciousness, like Mother Kali, the blackness, the radiant blackness of things. He's the explorer of the ethers, the sky wanderer. Beautiful. I feel like I'm teaching a poetry class. And sometimes when you look into an Upanishad, how it describes a deity like this. The sky wanderer, he explores the ethers. So, the sun will do that in the sky, but in the subtle ethers in heaven, there's also a sun there that's shining. And that's this prana, psychic prana. Those are the rays that are coming off that sun. And they're revealing heaven to all beings. How do you see and dream tonight? Where's the light? Who was it that asked me that recently? He said somebody, maybe said, you started thinking and meditating about, what lights up my dreams, right? So that's a beautiful thought, see, because we know what lights up out here, but how can I see in dreams? Where's that light coming from? That's a great thought, a great meditation to have. And so this is what Sankriti had when he went to find him and ask him all these questions, which are in the body of this Upanishad, Akshi Upanishad. And a few other Upanishads, we find him doing that as well. What else is written there? On one side, physical light. On the other side, the light of sensual perception, senses, the light of the senses. On one side, knowledge. On the other side, mental comprehension. On one side, wisdom. On the other side, normal intelligence, knowledge and intelligence. On one side, wisdom. On the other side, intelligence. On one side, insight, and the other side, awareness. On one side, sentiency. On the other side, pure consciousness. On one side, Brahman. On the other side, Shakti. So his rays going up either side have these complements to them. And this is what shines off of Surya, Narayan. So next time you salute the sun, if you're doing practice outside, maybe sit down and worship the sun and think about the sun, not just in his outer form, but in the internal form. That light which lights up everything. Of course, this quote here, probably can say the Sanskrit if you look at it, right? Om Bhur Bhuva Swaha Tat Savitur Varenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimohi Dhiyo Yona Prachodayat. As the Brahmin priests say, may we always and ever meditate on the radiant effulgence of the Supreme Being abiding in our hearts and minds eternally. It lights up Bhur Bhuva Swaha, that light. And this one is beautiful too, from Chants We Know. There within the inmost self of ever-living being, the sun does not shine, the moon nor stars nor lightning nor fire do not shine, much less this tiny mortal frame called prana. This is listed here too. Prana, or life force, is one of those rays coming off of him. By that one light, all else shines. By its light, all is made radiant. May that one light of pure conscious awareness enter into us and permeate us to the very core of our being. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. So when we do our arati in front of our shrines and the images, we wave a candle in front of each one and say, Na tatra surya bhati, na tandra charlakam. This beautiful chant in Sanskrit and in English has become our SRV mantra for light, for our pujas. And here's a beautiful one too, which I was thinking about meditating on actually for the last couple of days, because I had the English, but I couldn't remember the Sanskrit. all of a sudden, that I had to think for a little while, and I came up with Sanskrit. Had to do with light and sun, and the sun too. Shining like burnished gold, highest and deepest core intelligence of living beings, partless and indivisible, pure and free of all taint, the essence of everything which all beings seek, either consciously or unconsciously. There shines Brahman. It is that which the Guru teaches. It is that which the wise ones result in. So searching around for these beautiful mantras about light, put them all in this one chart. There were more I could have done. But this is basically what the Avadhut is speaking to us about when he says, shining like the sun. And tells us that by contemplating on that, this effulgent light, it took him beyond the intellect into the infinite light. Because the intellect has a light it shines by too. And that can become, associated with this third eye rather than these two eyes. As Sri Ramakrishna said, the eyes are in the center of the forehead, but they're always looking down to the lower centers, eating, drinking, and sex life. But this eye always looks inward. So that's where the Avadhut has found his pathway. And rishis like Sankriti and others have found the sun god standing right there, pointing inward to the light of Brahman, which lights up everything, even the sun. So we have taken as much as possible today in our time allowed in this beautiful stotram, Chalisa. Gyanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham. Gyanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham. Jananim sharanam devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Pado Padme Toye Shitwa Pranamami Mahur Mahur Pranamami